So, if I'm being completely honest, I've been a little disappointed with an awful lot of my own videos recently. Actually, not the ones I've physically released. I think they're perfectly okay, except for one or two. It's actually, I have an entire backload of videos that I've already recorded. I just don't feel like they're what people would want to watch. Even though I know that if I do release them, people will be perfectly fine and watch them. They just don't feel on par with the quality that I'd prefer to have my videos be. And so to try and give myself a bit of motivational kick to, just let you guys know what's been going on, why you haven't seen any videos in like a week, excluding the Antom situation. It's not that I don't have videos, I have a lot of videos. They're just, I'm currently going through a little bit of a something going on in my head. And so I figured, might as well create a bit of a backlog of me watching some recently released videos from a few theorist friends that I've made recently, and see what kind of stuff they've been thinking of, and catching up with their theories and letting you guys know my opinions on what's been going on. So that way I have something to release until I get an actual good product and something that I'm proud of to actually give to all of you. Because in truth, I have like 4 or 5 videos that I have already completely recorded. I just don't like them. They're just really bad quality and not something that I would personally like to release. So I'm trying to just do this so that way I can get more of a motivation, get my creative energies going and stuff, give you guys something to actually come back and watch, especially considering that when I watch other people's videos, I can tend to find certain details that actually help me find certain topics for ideas that I feel like need to be explored more. And this has been one that I've been sitting out on since I've kind of thought of this idea, and this is what I believe to be LeftyDCI Part 2, considering LeftyDCI Part 1 was 3 weeks ago. So I believe this should be LeftyDCI Part 2. I'm going to leave the channel description as well as the video inside of the description of this video for Cyanide. Cyanide is an awesome person, came up with LeftyDCI, came up with a lot of ideas. Someone I met recently, he's an awesome dude, comes up with a lot of awesome ideas. I've actually gave him like 1 or 2 points towards LeftyDCI because, as some of you guys know, I used to be sort of a lefty MCI kind of guy. It just seemed kind of like the right idea for a period of time, and so I used some of those pieces of information to help towards LeftyDCI. And so I'm kind of interested to see where it goes. I understand that, yes, it's a bit of a joke. Do I genuinely believe LeftyDCI? I don't know. I believe that the DCI are really weird and they haven't been given the attention that they deserve. To get it right off the bat, I already established in a video like a week, 2 weeks, somewhere around there, in which I was referring to what happened to the DCI. If you haven't watched that video, it should be inside of the info card or at the end of this video, which goes over what I think happened to the DCI, in which I came up with answers of, I think in the original story, Scott intended for the costumes to be where the soul resided, and FNAF 3 has the shells of both the FNAF 1 and FNAF 2 characters. Hence why the FNAF 3 fire ends up leading to all of them being set free. It's the happiest day of both the MCI and the DCI. But now that we have concepts like Remnant, which suggests the soul is in the metal, not the costume, it becomes a little bit of a weird thing of whatever happened to the toys Remnant. Some people believe that the Remnant was actually taken down to the Circus Baby bunker and used inside of the Scooper, and that they're also inside of the Fun Times and inside of Molten Freddy. That's Molten DCI or like some sort of Molten All. I don't know what its name would be. I'm sure someone will correct me. But that was one idea. Another idea is brought up by Cyanide and I believe T-Dreads, in which they came up with this idea of, hey, maybe the DCI are actually inside of Lefty, because Lefty was a machine built for the purpose of containing things. Make sure you guys go and watch the original Lefty DCI, which should also be in an info card or the description or somewhere on here, trust me. But with that being said, let's get into this video. I ignore the red bar. I have not watched
I introduced a
any
theory
of
I made with
this.
T-Dreads that had pretty big.
And despite me being all about 2 times speed, we're gonna watch it in normal speed. I'm not that much of a psychopath, Nara Raven, I promise.
In my last video, I introduced a theory I made with T-Dreads that had pretty big implications on the FNAF timeline. LeftyDCI. In short, it's saying that Lefty is possessed by the 5 children who were killed in the DCI. The responses to that were somewhat mixed. Some people really liked it, while others absolutely hated it. As for the people that were stuck in the middle, they weren't convinced of the evidence I provided, and to be honest, that's kinda my fault. In my rush to get this theory out there, I didn't fully consider all of the implications of what I was saying, nor did I take a step back and view the entire scope of it.
I never really thought about it that way. It is a little weird because I obviously am inside of these theorist spaces with the rest of them, and so when LeftyDCI was proposed, I did see it live being proposed and saw the information about LeftyDCI and like helped give piece of information, but I haven't really considered how this looks from somebody who just randomly sees a theorist one day say, maybe the DCI is in Lefty. Because obviously I'm someone who has a history with wondering if Lefty has more than just the puppet inside of it. However, I understand that a lot of people don't actually come up with those concepts, and that it's not really a popular idea within inside of the community, and so therefore people wouldn't actually understand what's going on here and how people made those connections. It wasn't really something that I thought about. Because to me, it just seemed like a natural progression of Lefty MCI. Just like a lot of stuff in this series, usually if you can't shove the MCI there, people usually try to shove the DCI there. It just seems to be what most theorists do. But I always forget that theorist culture is, it's much more broad than I really think about it. It's not that everyone's already experienced all of this so they know all the information. I forget there are some theorists out there that are just now getting into the series, and so seeing this information, like the DCI being in Lefty, despite it not being like something shouted at your face in FNAF 6, is a little silly and wouldn't really catch on. But it actually is surprising how quickly a lot of these ideas have been adopted and kind of talked about and joked about inside of the community, because not only has LeftyDCI been pretty popular, like for a whole week, it was all anything was ever talking about on Better FNAF Twitter and other spaces like that, but then you had 14 Theory, which released shortly after, and all this stuff. Right now, T-Dreads is trying to get Unhappiest Day, which is something he mentioned earlier today, trying to get that idea to blow up, and I have no doubt that they'll somehow manage to do it, because some reason this group of guys are able to get these ideas like really popular, even though this stuff is releasing like this week, and it's pretty awesome to be able to experience this and watch live as people craft ideas and then watch it become something popular with inside of the community. And it's really, it is really cool watching all these things get documented and seeing LeftyDCI inside of FNAF Theory databases and things like that, and knowing, hey, I watched that happen live. I helped with some of the evidence for that. That's pretty fucking awesome. But we're only 35 seconds in. I'm sorry, Cryo.
But now that some time has passed, me and TD have both gone over the evidence again, reviewing our own theories on the matter and uncovering new things to talk about. And now, I am 100% convinced that LeftyDCI is real. So today, I'm gonna double down on it. I will give you my full interpretation and timeline of events. I think I'll be able to convince some of you, but for the people that I can't convince, I ask you not to turn your head and walk away from what I'm presenting. Because there's one thing that I can tell you for a fact. The community at large has overlooked something about FNAF 6 for a long time. And if the evidence that I have doesn't suggest LeftyDCI, then it suggests something else entirely. And I want to figure out what that something is.
I'm sorry I keep interrupting Cryo, but you did come here for my input. That is why you're watching a reaction video. I will say there were some pieces of information that I proposed that I feel like are pretty solid and do semi-suggest some pieces of information. The blob does contain, or not the blob, but the security breach museum, the one that we see like up there, we actually see pieces from the toy animatronics suggesting that their metal was somewhere present in the FFPS location. That's why, most notably, I don't really go around with the remnant idea, like the idea that their remnant was melted down and then injected into the Lefty machine or into Molten Freddy and things like that. More so, since their physical endoskeletons still exist, that more so implies to me that either A, their endoskeleton pieces were put inside of Lefty, or B, their pieces were just chilling in some other room at the FFPS location after Henry purchased them after the fire and the auction. But what we do know is that their endoskeletons were at Security Breach or were at FFPS and are now in Security Breach. However, I'm going to say there's a pretty good chance the DCI already moved on, so those pieces of metal aren't haunted anymore, which means they have to have survived a fire. But that's just my thoughts. I'm not sure about the whole injecting remnant, because I've seen some of that stuff about using the scooper to inject remnant into Lefty. I don't know about that stuff. It kind of suggests soul splitting when we start getting into those areas, because, the MCI were just flat out all thrown into a furnace and melted. Their endoskeletons are pure metal. There's nothing left over from their endoskeletons. I know that there are endoskeleton parts down there, but those aren't necessarily the MCI's endoskeleton parts. I know that there are the toys, and I would assume any other remaining ones could be in reference to the Endo 01, which we objectively see inside of the FNAF 1 gameplay inside of parts and service. Follow Me also shows parts of endoskeletons still there, so it wouldn't be surprising to me if Henry just managed to pick those up at an auction or something of the sort, or potentially at Fazbear Frights, considering that they most likely did have those pieces if they went and searched for it at Freddy's, and then just casually had all those pieces of metal. They ended up inside of the FFPS fire, now they're all burnt, and end up inside of the Security Breach Museum. I can't remember off the top of my head if the MCI's endoskeletons are there, but if they are, then it's most likely not the MCI's endoskeletons, because we see them physically burn in in the furnace. They're completely metal. There's no way for their endoskeletons to still exist. They are pure remnant. But let's continue.
So, without further ado, let's double down on my craziest theory yet. We're going to start this off a bit differently than usual. Rather than me just diving right into what I think, I'd like to propose a question to you all first. Much like any other question originating from this series, it's pretty open-ended and technically doesn't have a correct answer, but I certainly have an answer of my own for it, and I'd like to see what everyone else thinks as well. I'll go into my answer later in the video, so for now, I want you to just think about this as we progress through the theory. The question is, why does Henry have access to the blueprints for the Afton Robotics scooper in FNAF 6?
Answer: after Afton was taken out of the company, it's fairly clear that if Henry has the ability to open a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza restaurant, that means that Henry is the current CEO as of FNAF 6 of Fazbear Entertainment. Despite being called Afton Robotics and being created by Afton, the fact that characters like Funtime Chica, Funtime Freddy, Funtime Foxy, and other licensed characters from the Freddy band, as in they are trademarked by Fazbear Entertainment, would suggest that they are now owned by Fazbear Entertainment. They are Fazbear Entertainment property. Which means after Afton was taken away from the company, he can't just go back to sister location and say, oh, well, I'm going to program all this stuff. No, it is now Fazbear Entertainment property, which means Henry would be able to easily go down there and see all the blueprints of the batshit insane things that he was building, because it's now his property to be able to deal with.
Pause if you'd like while thinking about it, or just keep it in the back of your mind as I start with our first main topic for today, Lefty's appearance in Ultimate Custom Night. Last time, I concluded that Lefty was possessed by a dead child, much like a good chunk of the other animatronics in the game. Since then, this was brought to my attention by T-Dreads.
Job description: this is for a character in an upcoming expansion to Five Nights at Freddy's 6. The script is very short, but the character is important nonetheless. The character is Lefty, a possessed sentient bear who likes to whisper a taunt after killing the player. The voice should be soft, yet chilling, and a little menacing as well. I've never really realized the very close connection to Golden Freddy that Lefty has. This stance that it is going on here is fairly similar to Golden Freddy's pose, but her head is the other direction as compared to Golden Freddy's.
The other animatronics in the game. Since then, this was brought to my attention.
They even both have their microphones. That's something I never saw people mention. Golden Freddy, the withered variant, has a microphone in his hand. No, the main one has a microphone in his hand as well. That shouldn't physically be possible. Those microphones are not physically attached to the costume. Those microphones have to be physically held. Which means, interesting. Interesting. I never really thought about that. That's really interesting. Huh. I'll have to keep that in the back of my head. And no, she does the same exact pose as the original one from FNAF 1. Same hand for... No, not same hand. But it is just the FNAF 1 Golden Freddy pose. Interesting.
Much like a good chunk of the other animatronics in the game. Since then, this was brought to my attention by T-Treads, confirming that Lefty is possessed by Scott's own words. However, when it comes to who possesses this animatronic, that's where I lost some people. There are a good chunk of people that are under the impression that Lefty is possessed by Charlie, due to the...
However, as we know, this isn't true because Lefty's specific purpose is to capture Charlie. It cannot be possessed by Charlie because Charlie is still inside of the puppet. Lefty is specifically built with a music box and, I believe, shocking in order to keep the puppet asleep, which means Charlie is still possessing the puppet itself. So if the bear Lefty is considered sentient, as in that it's a possessed bear, then that means whatever is possessing it is not referring to Charlie.
The puppet inhabiting Lefty as of Ultimate Custom Night. While I understand where they're coming from, I actually disagree for a lot of reasons. Firstly, as I said in my last video, Lefty and the puppet have two different voice actresses. I kinda think that this is pretty damning in and of itself. If they're the same person, then why are they voiced by different people? But not everyone is satisfied with only that, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of things. Lefty's name is made up of 5 acronyms: Lure, Encapsulate, Fuse, Transport, and Extract. Last time, I made a point of Fuse potentially meaning something bigger, but I'm willing to give this point up and admit that I was jumping the gun a bit. Despite the fact that it's the thing that kinda jump-started this whole theory, I don't think it's actually necessary for everything else to work. That said, there's a good chance that Fuse just means that Lefty fused with the puppet, which could be interpreted as Charlie now possessing Lefty. So then, why am I so against the idea that Charlie is the sole possessing Lefty in this game? Well, let's talk about the final act.
See, the weird thing about that is it's an Elizabeth situation. What's the point of the whole music box encapsulating her whole thing if the characters just fuse? Because then she would just be in control of Lefty. And if she's in control of Lefty, then she could just turn off the music box and the shocking and just leave. Well, I'm not sure. I don't know how... The abilities that these ghost children can do are really weird, but I don't know. It just doesn't make sense for Charlie to fuse with Lefty. It makes more sense that Lefty is a cage physically holding Charlie in place that she cannot escape from. Once she's lured into Lefty, she cannot leave.
Acronym in Lefty's name. Extract. We never really get a hint for what this means. We can gather what everything else is pretty easily. Lefty lured the puppet, then encapsulated it and fused with it before transporting it to the FNAF 6 location.
Unless fuse is, like, referring to trapping it. Like, would you consider Springtrap to be a fusion? As in, William Afton technically can't control Springtrap. Springtrap still has programming. If it hears the Balloon Boy sound, it's forced to go to the Balloon Boy sound. But William Afton is still technically fused with the suit. I feel like that's probably what it's referring to. Yeah, that makes the most sense. And that wouldn't really be considered William possessing Spring Bonnie, because William doesn't possess Spring Bonnie. William Afton is still alive. So he genuinely is just a body trapped inside of the Spring Bonnie suit. Huh. If you're confused on what I'm referring to, William Afton not being dead, that's a very long story for another day.
Location. But extract? We never see anything like that. We know that the puppet's in there still, so it's not like the animatronic got extracted. I was stumped on this for a little bit, but then I got to thinking. And that's when it hit me.
And to you monsters trapped in the corridors, be still, and give up your spirits. They don't belong to you. For most of you, I believe there is peace, and perhaps more, waiting for you after the smoke clears. Although for one of you, the darkest pit of hell has opened to swallow you whole. So don't keep the devil waiting, friend. My daughter, if you can hear me, I knew you would return as well. It's in your nature to protect the innocent.
During the FNAF
I still think Rye was pretty spot on with mentioning the fact that there's only 3 burners. So what in the actual fuck happened to Lefty?
Fire,
it's really weird.
All of the salvage animatronics pop up on screen. All except for Lefty. This is already pretty weird. Why would Lefty not show up here? Even if the animatronic himself isn't all that important, certainly Charlie is. And keep in mind, Henry directly speaks to Charlie during this scene, immediately after he directly speaks to Afton. When he speaks to Afton, we could see Scraptrap pop up on screen, and that's right.
It's possible. I didn't really think about this. It's possible the reason she's not burned is because of something we've already kind of established previously. Charlotte can move on whenever she wants. She quite literally has the ability to move on whenever she wants. I think it's established in Frights that if someone's body is discovered, then they are capable of moving on. You also have the Happiest Day explanation. I don't know. It just feels like since Charlie knows she's dead, she knows William Afton killed her, and all of this information, and she's more aware than the others. It's pretty heavily implied Charlie can move on whenever she wants. She just chooses not to because she's staying behind to protect the other children. Which makes me wonder if the reason she wasn't burned like the others is because she doesn't need to be burned. Because Henry already knows she can give up, that she is perfectly capable of moving on. He doesn't have to burn her because unlike the others who are going to fight to survive, she physically has the ability to just move on whenever she wants.
Right after we see the other 2 salvage animatronics.
Because William, Molten Freddy, and Elizabeth, none of them would give up willingly. There is nothing in their body or soul that would make them give up. Elizabeth knows the truth about what happened to her. UCN heavily suggests she knows. And yet she still is trying to work with William because she's just a little girl trying to make her father proud. So regardless, she would not willingly give up her soul because she still feels like she has not achieved her goal of making William Afton see her as a real daughter. Molten Freddy physically does not want to give up. And William Afton sure as shit does not want to give up. So they would all need to be burned to physically melt their remnants and make it to where it's fairly difficult to remain conscious so that they're kind of forced to give in and move on. Huh.
So, for all intents and purposes, there's no good reason for Lefty to be left out of this. But for some reason, he was. Why? Well, there's one answer I could come up with. What if putting Lefty on screen there would have been misleading? What if showing off Lefty while Henry was directly speaking to Charlie was misleading? Because Charlie wasn't actually inside of Lefty. But how is that even possible? How can Charlie's soul not be inside of Lefty when she's inside of the puppet that Lefty fused with as of this point in the timeline? Well, that brings me to the answer I have for the question I asked all of you at the start of this video. the reason why Henry has the blueprints to the scooper. There are 2 other blueprints found in the game, one for Lefty and one for Rask, the audio alert used throughout FNAF 6. Now, why would the scooper also be here?
I will say it is fairly strange that they all utilize the same exact blueprints, which I believe is also the same exact blueprints for the sister location animatronics. Let me see. Sister location. Blueprints. I think that's the same exact background. Sorry, it's not as cyan, it's not as turquoise, but it's the same exact background. It's weird, because that would suggest William made Lefty. Huh. Could William have made Lefty? I don't know.
Here, unless Henry intended to build one. Well, as it turns out, he did build one. We just don't see it in FNAF 6. We never see it at all. Until we get to Ruin. The fact that there's a fully operational scooper in Ruin has always bothered me, because it literally comes out of nowhere and has zero explanation as to why it's there and why it looks so different. I mean, look at this next to the blueprints. These are
Yeah, those are 2 completely different versions of the scooper, and yet I think it's confirmed that that is a scooper. It exists in a completely different kind of scooper room, and I think it has generators around it from the Pizzaplex, suggesting this is a Pizzaplex machine built. Like the Pizzaplex built this machine. I'm not sure, though. It is a really weird design of the machine, because it does not match the old scooper at all.
Entirely different creations, and I think that's intentional, because I think that they serve different purposes. Follow me on this for a moment. Why would Henry be building something that's meant to inject Remnant? He's not the one who's been experimenting with it and trying to bridge the gap between life and death. That's William's thing. Even if Lefty DCI is real, I don't think that it means that Henry has Remnant on hand. To my understanding, that's not how Remnant even works. So, by all means, this is a pretty useless thing for Henry to build. So, what if this isn't a Remnant injector? What if it's the exact opposite? A Remnant extra.
See, that's the other thing. Specifically, the scooper is built with an automated system intended to, remove the shelving and kind of... the way it's depicted in Sister Location's really weird, because it shows it destroy the animatronic, like remove its shelling. So, that wouldn't really be considered injecting the character with Remnant. It kinda... I'm not sure. I really don't know. Unless... I'm not sure. The scooper's really weird, because... Let's go back to that scooper blueprint. Excavating arm, Remnant injector, arm base, Remnant reservoir. Scalable creation of ulterior presence. So its purpose is to inject Remnant, which then explains why Michael was able to survive. But then why does it destroy the shells? That's what's bothering me. Sister location shells or scooper. Is this the right one, or is this just a... Yep, I think it is. I don't think that's an animation.
very important that I've learned how to do over time. Do you know what that is? How to pretend. Do you ever play make-believe? Pretend to be one way when you are really the other? It's very important. Ballora never learns, but I do. They think there is something wrong on the inside. The only thing that matters is knowing how to pretend.
See, how the hell is that an injector? It quite literally, I guess it doesn't remove her shell, but it attacks her abdomen. I'm not sure. Is that really injecting anything? Because it really just seems like it's smashing against it. That's it. Like it's gutting it. I don't think gutting something would be considered injecting it. But we do see the injector... the injector's B. It's in the middle, right here. A is for removing things. B is for injecting the remnant. I really don't know. The scooper's such a weird fucking thing.
2 other blueprints found in the game. One for and scoop. Look at this next to the channel, because I think that they serve different purposes. Follow me on this for a moment. Why would Henry be building something that's meant to inject remnant? He's not the one who's been experimenting with it and trying to bridge the gap between lanes that by all. What if this isn't a remnant injector? What if it's the exact opposite? A remnant extractor? Take a closer look at the scooper. Obviously it looks a lot different from the scooper that we've known since Sister Location, but there's one detail about it that's never been brought up before. In the very center of it, it has a small needle. Unlike the After Robotics scooper that would mangle whatever it touched, this scooper was made with precision in mind, able to target an exact point without causing too much damage to the animatronic. And what do we see in FNAF 6? An animatronic in almost perfect condition, with the exception of one piece of damage. His eye. This is why Henry built the scooper. Not to inject remnant into things, but to extract remnant out of it. And by the time of FNAF 6, he had used it on Lefty's broken eye, and extracted Charlie's soul from within. And that's why every time we see the puppet's mask after FNAF 6, whether it be in a book or in a game, there's a key difference. The tears are now gone. The tears that formed as soon
Charlie Soul is still in the mask as of Fazbear Frights, the end of the epilogues. Otherwise, there wouldn't be the whole whispering to him to throw the puppet mask. Because otherwise, it would just imply that William ripped himself apart out of just his own anxiety, his own delusions. Believing that maybe Charlie was still in it, that'd be a little strange. I think it is implied that that Charlie's still at least in the mask as of the events of Fazbear Frights, but I don't know. Maybe it's a soul-splitting situation.
As soon as Charlie possessed the puppet, have now been taken away, extracted along with Charlie's soul by the scooper, so Henry could spend his final moments with the only person that mattered to him. Okay, that was a lot. And all of that was entirely just to prove that Lefty isn't possessed by Charlie in Ultimate Custom Night, which means Lefty's possessed by someone else, someone that's still unaccounted for. Which brings us back to where this theory began in the first place, Candy Cadet's story about the kind man and the 5 orphans. Now, there were a good chunk of people last time telling me that I was taking this story a bit too literally, which is something I both agree and disagree with. On one hand, this obviously shouldn't be taken one for one. There wasn't actually someone adopting 5 orphans, and there wasn't a real burglar that snuck into someone's house and killed them all. However, that doesn't mean that we should just ignore every detail that this story gives us. If the point of this story was just 5 things becoming one, then we wouldn't have 3 different stories with that resolution. That would just be redundant. So let's outline the core elements of this story and go from there. We have a kind man, 5 children, a burglar, and a coffin. The kind man takes in the 5 children, the burglar kills the 5 children, the kind man stitches the 5 dead children together, and something comes to life from them. That's what this story is dumbed down to its very core, and as such, it's what we're going to try and solve. Let's start with a bit of a roll call, namely for the kind man. In my previous video, I concluded that the kind man has to be Henry Emily, as no one else particularly fit the description that well. However, this didn't sit well with a lot of people, namely because it would mean that Henry Emily was responsible for stitching 5 bodies together and putting them in the same coffin. So, for the sake of argument, let's say that I'm wrong. So if the kind man isn't Henry, then who else could it be? Well, there really aren't that many options. In my comments section of the last video, I heard 2 come up, so let's go over them real quick. First off, the puppet. There are a lot of reasons why I disagree with this one. The puppet is hardly a kind man. It's a non-sentient animatronic made to protect children, that eventually becomes a sentient animatronic possessed by a little girl, trying to shepherd lost souls into a peaceful afterlife. Also, whenever we see the puppet interact with dead children, they usually all get their own unique masks, a far cry from the single coffin that the kind man shoves all the dead children into. So,
that kind of imply... I don't know. I can see where the idea comes from. It's just a little strange, considering adopted the 5 kids. I would assume that's give gifts, give life, right? Then the burglar destroying them would be follow me, I guess? But then Charlie doesn't really put them back together after follow me. The person who puts them back together is whoever puts them in the furnace. I don't know.
So if you ask me, no, Candy Cadet isn't talking about the puppet here. However, I do think that Candy Cadet references Charlie and the puppet in a different story. And if you want to hear more about that, go check this video out from T-Dreads where we go over it. So, the puppet's a no-go. So instead, let's talk about our other candidate, William. This one's kind of weird, and it wasn't my idea to begin with, but let's go over it. It's something like this.
I will say there's more merit for it being William, specifically because UCN Candy Cadet Stories uses the emphasis on the kind man and the little boy being referring to William. Or, at least it's important to UCN. The kind man and the little boy are important to UCN. Because Candy Cadet specifically has, in the UCN office, he repeats specific sets of lines about the kind man and the boy putting the pieces together. It emphasizes that actually twice, saying he put the pieces together. It's fairly strange.
The kind man and the burglar are both William Afton, with the kind man being a facade that William uses to lure the children in. I kinda get where this is coming from, but I really don't see how you can make it work. This story relies pretty heavily on the kind man and the burglar being 2 different people, not only from the perspective of the kids, but from the perspective of the kind man himself. The reason that the kind man wanted to adopt the children was because he thought they'd be at greater risk of the burglar killing them otherwise. On that note, this implies that the kind man knew of someone going around killing children, and was actively trying to stop them, which doesn't line up with what William is doing in these games at all. However, it lines up extremely well with everything that we think we know about Henry, the person that I concluded was being represented by the kind man in the first place. There's also this line here that says that the kind man was giving the kids toys, which is synonymous with FNAF 2. And what happens in FNAF 2? The DCI, where William Afton sneaks in undercover and kills 5 children, like a burglar in the night, breaking in when no one is there to spot him. William has to be the burglar. We don't have anyone else who goes around killing children like that. And since it seems impossible for the burglar and the kind man to be the same person, that means that the only candidate we have left for the role is Henry. This, however, leads us to a weird conclusion. This would now mean that Henry Emily is the one who stitched 5 bodies together and stuffed them into one coffin.
See, when I tried to solve this Candy Cadet story, the way I interpreted it is that that was an unintentional consequence. The whole point of stitching the bodies together and placing it in one coffin was not the implication that he wanted them to come back to life. It was the implication that what he thought he was doing was giving the children rest. We know he has his hands on the blueprints, and so I was under the interpretation that, hey, the blueprints say that Remnant ends up neutralizing underneath a bunch of heat. What's a place in which a bunch of heat would be generated? A furnace. Specifically, those Scooper mentions and all that stuff is in Sister Location, which we know has a furnace. That would be the perfect place for Henry to toss the endoskeletons into, trying to set them free, giving them their happiest day or whatever, in an attempt to, hey, you put them in fire, get rid of the remnant. What he didn't know is that that was connected to an automated system that would then plunge all of the remnants, all the melted metal that came from those endoskeletons in the furnace, would then be injected into the Funtime animatronics. Hence why it says there's a knock at the door. It was referring to the fact that he accidentally caused the Funtime or caused Molten Freddy to come into existence. He accidentally caused them to become possessed. It's just really weird, because UCN would suggest the kind man has to be William, but I don't know. It really is confusing. But I figure he's going to try and use this to support Lefty DCI, obviously.
Giving it new life. This is where it gets hard for me to figure out exactly what's going on. On one hand, the evidence I have suggests exactly what I said in my last video. Lefty's possessed by someone that's unaccounted for. A kind man is responsible for stitching together 5 bodies and giving them new life. The same kind man that's synonymous with giving these kids toys. To me, that all screams Lefty DCI. But if that's the case, then I also have to accept the difficult part of that solution. This would make Henry a total hypocrite, playing with innocent children's souls while simultaneously condemning William for doing the exact same thing. I'm gonna level with you guys for a moment. This is where I started to doubt this theory a little bit. I can say with confidence that Lefty is possessed in Ultimate Custom Night. I can say with confidence that Charlie's soul was extracted from Lefty sometime before FNAF 6, and isn't the voice that comes from Lefty. I can say with confidence that the DCI is being referenced by this Candy Cadet story, and I can say with confidence that the kind man in this story is Henry Emily. But when it comes to this, I can't say that I have an answer that I'm super confident in. However, I am confident that I've eliminated the other possibilities. That means that no matter how improbable the remaining answer is, it has to be true. Either that, or there's a stone left unturned. But I can't account for things that I don't know yet, so I have to do the next best thing. Commit as hard as I can to what I have on hand, and go as far with it as possible. Let's start off with the obvious. Why? Why did Henry feel the need to do any of what he did here? Well, there's only one answer that makes any amount of sense to me. He didn't want this to happen. He was trying to hide the bodies, perhaps because of what would have happened if someone—
Hey, look at that. He didn't want this to happen. That's wavelengths, guys, wavelengths.
Say the police, for instance, saw those bodies. If that happened, who would have gotten blamed? If Henry thought he would have gotten caught in the crossfire for that, then maybe he decided to do the one thing that would save his skin. Hide the bodies where the police have historically never looked. The animatronics. Well, specifically, one animatronic. He's not crazy enough to put them in the animatronics that go on stage. Only William is insane enough to pull that off. So instead, he put them in the only animatronic that he could afford to put them in, Lefty. Or, well, not exactly Lefty. Considering the fact that Lefty's name is made up of 5 acronyms all relating to Henry's plans for the puppet, it feels strange to say that Lefty was around at the time of FNAF 2, at least in his current form. However, there's a very
Fall Fest Carney. Carney has existed since 1983.
easy alternative. Carney. Carney looks almost identical to Lefty as is, and seems to have been around for Fall Fest, which happens years before FNAF 2 does. I can very easily believe that Lefty is a rebuilt version of Carney. And since Carney's around by the time of the DCI, I can believe that this is the coffin that Henry buried all of those bodies in. And then, to Henry's shock, Carney comes to life, an amalgamation of the 5 children's souls. After seeing this possession firsthand, this is what would lead to Henry realizing just how depraved William truly is, and to serve as his motivation for what he does in FNAF 6. So, during the years that Henry is completely missing from the story, he spends his time reverse engineering the Scooper, to now serve as a remnant extractor, and
I really hate to be this guy, but the timeline's not adding up, I don't think. In order for them to be placed into the Lefty animatronic to possess it, the puppet system has to have already gone through, which would be as late as shortly after FNAF 1. If you interpret FNAF 3's puppet-like placement, that the puppet shows up in FNAF 3 to be serious, then that means she still wasn't inside a Lefty until after the events of FNAF 3. If you don't consider that canonical, then you can probably roughly place the creation of Lefty and the whole capturing stuff to be maybe as early as after the events of FNAF 2? I'm not sure, but that would kind of imply Lefty has just existed out in the world. I don't know. The timeline's just not really matching there, because, you know, the puppet has to be captured and injected out of the puppet, out of the puppet and Lefty, and then him put the souls of the DCI into Lefty. And all that stuff happening around FNAF 2. And then how is she connected to the others for Happiest Day and all the other minigames, which suggests that she's still there with the others? I mean, she shows up in the Happiest Day minigame, which means she has to set up the Happiest Day minigame or be set free inside of the Happiest Day minigame, which Happiest Day is suggested to either happen during FNAF 3 or FNAF 6. I just don't know. And the fact that he mentions Charlie at all suggests that Charlie is still at the FFPS location as he's speaking. And I don't know. Then the question is, what did he do with Charlotte? Because he intended on killing himself. So then, what would he do with Charlotte? I don't know.
Refurbishing Carney into Lefty. I think that he continued to use this animatronic because, just like the kind man of the Candy Cadet story, he can't afford to make an entirely new one after spending so much to build a new scooper and an entire audio lore system. This is reinforced further by the fact that in FNAF 6, you literally have to earn all of the funds that you use to buy other animatronics in the game. Then he sends Lefty out to capture the puppet and bring it back to him, where he extracts his daughter's soul and then waits for someone to take the FNAF 6 job offer. And, well, we know how things go from there. Honestly, I think it all works out really well. It fits together while simultaneously explaining things that we never had a proper answer for. And it doesn't change anything about how climactic FNAF 6's end.
Yes, but again, what happened to Charlie, though? I don't know. I feel like it'd make a lot more sense to suggest that Charlie was physically removed from the suit. That it'd make a lot more sense that her body was removed from Lefty, which then would explain why Lefty doesn't show up there, because Lefty is purely the toy animatronics, and that the puppet, again, can move on whenever she wants. It would still explain why she still possesses the mask as late as Fazbear Frights. I don't know.
Ending was for the story. Honestly,
at least that's my interpretation. That's my interpretation of Lefty DCI. That the extraction was removing Charlie for somehow. Maybe he took Charlie's mask, and since she was possessing the mask itself, potentially. I mean, her whole representation of giving gifts, giving life is the masks. The masks we see in FNAF 3 are the things that are on the ground. In the Happiest Day minigame, it's the masks. FNAF 4, it's the masks. It all kind of suggests the mask, maybe she's one of those where she possesses the mask itself, similar to how the Stitch Wraith became possessed. And he removed the mask of Charlie, which then would come with her soul as well for some reason, which then would leave just the puppet's body, like completely lifeless body, inside of Lefty for him to put and inject the toy animatronics into it. That's my interpretation that I'm seeing so far of Lefty DCI. That would be my interpretation that makes the most sense, because then it explains why. It explains what happens to her after. If she's still physically in the mask, then the mask would somehow end up in the hands of Larson. You know? it could suggest that she was never burned. If she was never burned, then she could just casually be sitting on some bench or inside of some briefcase or something, just casually outside of FFPS. It never burns. Ends up getting sent to police, like custody or wherever the fuck Larson finds the mask. I can't remember. And then that explains why she still possesses the mask. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it just enhances it even further. Some of you probably have a problem with me trying to retroactively fit Carney into events that transpire primarily around FNAF 2 and FNAF 6, when this animatronic wasn't even revealed until Help Wanted 2. And on one hand, I get it, and I don't really like doing it either. However, I think it's pretty important to understand that Scott does retroactive storytelling in his games a lot. Hell, everything we see in FNAF 1 is a story that he retroactively made after the game's success. So, while Carney might not have always been the answer, I certainly think he fits in now, and I think everything else fits in just as well. And, for the record, if you think retroactively fitting Carney in is problematic, just wait a few months until we get Secret of the Mimic, and people start retroactively changing everything about the timeline. But that's a headache for another day. For now, I'm gonna head out. Thanks for watching. This is my first time doing a proper part 2 to a video. Honestly, I didn't plan for it at first, but I thought it was really important for me to make this because, honestly, I really think I have something here. I think there's something more to Lefty DCI that I showed in the last video, and I wanted to push this as far as I could. So if you have any thoughts about what I might be missing, feel free to leave it in the comments. Or, call me a fucking idiot down there for thinking any of this could be real or something. That works too. And be sure to like and subscribe. Anyway, I'm out of here. You'll see me again on someone else's channel pretty soon. Keep your eyes peeled, and consider it a precursor for the inevitable FNAF 2 video. Take it easy.
Okay, my thoughts. Lefty DCI works perfectly fine. It just has a little bit of an area that I disagree with. I think that the extraction was that the puppet or the puppet's mask or something was removed from the Lefty animatronic, which then would leave perfect space for the toy animatronics to be injected into the Lefty character. This would then explain why her mask is still possessed during the events of Fazbear Frights, because her soul is still in the marionette. However, she was never burned, there's no burner for her. It does leave the question of what happened to Lefty. Did Lefty even get burned, since there's not a burner for Lefty either? I have no idea. I'll let you guys play around with that idea, but that is my interpretation of Lefty DCI. However, there is one other issue, and I'm sure everyone on Twitter is going to bring it up, and that is the idea that technically that scooper kinda seems Fazbear Entertainment modern made. It's iffy. I don't think there's any real reason why Henry couldn't have just used the normal scooper, since it is an injector, to potentially have just, hey, take the mask from the marionette out of the Lefty machine, now she no longer has a body, she's just a mask, right? And it doesn't get burnt. It later ends up in the hands of Larson. Whereas Lefty doesn't need a special version of the scooper to inject it, it just gets normally injected. I think that since it is a blueprint from the same set, or at least on the same blueprint paper, similar to the Funtime animatronics, similar to the scooper itself, could suggest that that Carney, or the Lefty machine that was built after Carney and things like that, might have been William made, and that Henry utilized the system for his own goals, and that he could have just used the normal scooper on Lefty and just injected the souls that way, because it is a remnant injector. I figure you could just take off the stomach plate, throw the DCI's remnant into the injector, and then fucking turn it on and scoop it into Lefty, and now Lefty's possessed by the DCI. That makes the most sense to me. But I'll let you guys decide. I'm going to be putting Cryonide's channel and this video, as well as the original Lefty DCI video, inside of the description of this video if you guys want to see me do more reaction content. because I think it's pretty cool stuff. You get to hear me be a fucking nerd about this kind of stuff and bring up specific mentions or specific angles that no one's ever seen before, or potentially just haven't really thought about in a while. And it's fairly easy for me to make, so that way I can give you guys something to watch while I try to actually make good content for the rest of you, because I have major insecurity issues and do not like my own videos. So, make sure to subscribe to Cryonide, who came up with this idea. Lefty DCI is fucking gas, and most likely is in some way, shape, or form canon, and has some fairly interesting implications if it is. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Mata ne.